All right, welcome back to part 2 of our practice questions dealing with brokerage relationships. Obviously this is a big part of the state exam. To get your license, out of, I think it's like 135 questions total on the state exam. A large percentage of that, which is going to be like 20 or 25 questions, are coming out of this module, out of this area, brokerage relationships. So, let's jump right into it and see if we can answer some of these questions. An agent and seller have entered into an agency relationship. The seller is now required to maintain confidentiality, accept the advice and opinions of the agent, provide adequate opportunity for the agent to show the house to prospective buyers, and lastly, to keep the agent's best interest in mind when making decisions. Well, we know they don't owe confidentiality, right? Not to the agent. Now, the agent owes that to the client, or in this case, to the seller, so A is not right. B, they're required to accept the advice and opinions of the agent. They're not required to. Certainly be nice if they would listen, but they're not required to do that. They can make up their own mind. C is provide adequate opportunity for the agent to show the house to prospective buyers. Hopefully if you recall or should know, there are some legal obligations the client owes back to the agent. And one of those legal responsibilities under the agency relationship is opportunity. So I like C. And then D is keep the agent's best interest in mind. No, the seller's not operating on behalf of the agent, so that's not right. So I would say C is the right answer, because the client does have to provide ample opportunity, or in this case, adequate opportunity. Hopefully that one wasn't too hard. So let's look at another one. When an agency relationship is created, this relationship is built on. That's a biggie right there. And I expect in some way, shape, or form, they're going to make sure you know the answer to this. But let's see. A is trust and confidence. I like that. B, what is right and fair. It's got nothing to do with agency relations. That looks a good idea just for life in general. But right and fair does not define agency. Buying and selling real estate does not really define agency. Give and take is necessary. No. Trust and confidence. Obviously, that's the right answer. That's a big deal. You need to keep that in mind, for real world purposes when you're out there practicing real estate. When you enter into this relationship, it's built on trust and confidence by law, which means that client can, they have the right to trust you. They have a lot of confidence that when you advise or make suggestions, give opinions, it's going to be good advice. It turned out not to be so good, you could have a problem there, because they have a legal right to trust and put all their confidence in your ability. So I'm not going to teach, so I'll leave it at that. The next question, all the following brokerage relationships are legal in South Carolina except buyer agency, that's legal. Seller agency, that's legal. Disclosed designated agency, that's legal. That's just an alternative to dual agency, which is also legal. And then lastly, disclosed implied agency. Well, there you go. We know implied agency, disclosed or not, is illegal in South Carolina. Now, if you're not in South Carolina, maybe in some other state, it is, implied agency is legal in some states. So you certainly want to look into what your state law requires. But in South Carolina, implied agency is illegal. All right. An agent has a house listed for sale. The seller asks the agent to show him other houses for sale since they will have to buy another house when his house sells. Would this be considered implied agency? This is very common here, and quite frankly, they may word the question a little differently on the exam, but I know they like to ask stuff like this. But obviously the agent has listed this house for sale, and a lot of times when you're representing the seller, they will also want you to help them find the house that they intend to purchase, right? Because they got to move somewhere. So in this case, the seller's now asking their agent to show them some potential houses they might be interested in buying. And the question is, would this be considered implied agency? Well, let's look at our options here. Excuse me. A says no. They signed an agency agreement when the seller listed the home. That's really got nothing to do with in this case, the seller acting as a buyer. B, no, because the agent is already representing the seller. Well, they are representing the seller, but as a seller, not the buyer. And then C is no, because the seller requested the agent to show him homes for sale. That kind of contributes to the argument that you have an implied agency there. But D says yes, if the seller did not sign a buyer's agreement for representation. D is going to be the answer. But I'm going to tell you, this is a mistake that a lot of agents make. And again, not that they intend to do this, they're just not thinking this thing through. Because a lot of times we are thinking that because I listed the house, that created the agency relationship. But what kind of agency did you create? Seller agency. So you are representing them as the seller. If they want to buy a house, now that's going to require a buyer agency, which means they'll have to sign a buyer agency agreement. If they don't sign the buyer agency agreement, that's absolutely implied agency, because obviously the seller already believes that the agent's representing them, right? Because of the listing agreement. That's by definition implied agency. You're representing them as the buyer, and you have not created a buyer agency relationship. Make sure you understand that, because they'll try to get you on the exam with stuff like that. Be very careful there. All right. An agency relationship may be involuntarily terminated. Now, I think the key word here is involuntarily. So how could that be terminated involuntarily? A, due to performance. No. B, when mutually agreed upon. Well, that's the exact opposite of involuntary, right? If they agreed to it, then it's not involuntary. Death of the principal, that could be one. And D, the subagent is incapacitated for some reason. Maybe they're in the hospital or whatever. What you want to be careful of here, especially with D, the subagent. That's the licensee. Remember, subagent's not the same as the agent. And when we're dealing with agency relationships, that's between what two parties? The agent and the principal. Well, who's the agent? The broker in charge, not the subagent. So, even though it'd be a terrible thing if something happens to the subagent, but the reality is, in terms of this agency relationship, if something happens to the subagent, it has no bearing on the agency relationship, because you're not a principal, right? You're not a party to this relationship. But the principal is a party. So C would have to be the right answer. Death of the principal. That would be an involuntary termination right there. No question. Or quite frankly, if it said death of the agent, or like it said, like in D, I think it was, if it said if the agent was incapacitated. That would be one, but not the subagent, right? You got to remember who are the parties to this relationship, okay? All right, next question. A licensee has a buyer client wishing to make an offer on a property listed for sale by the licensee's company. The buyer insists on exclusive representation. Which relationship would meet the buyer's requirements? So the buyer's wanting exclusive representation with a house listed by this licensee's company, right? So options are A, disclose dual agency. You can't do dual agency if one of the parties insists on exclusive representation, right? Because if you're a dual agent, then you're not exclusive. B, disclose designated agency. Well, that could be an option. C, buyer agency. Well, buyer agency, you're still dealing with a dual agency situation here, right? You got a house listed by the same company that the licensee working with this buyer is representing. So if this buyer wants to use that company, that's going to be a dual agency situation here. So just buyer agency is not going to work. And then transaction broker. Could you be a transaction broker? Not in this case, because the buyer is saying they want exclusive representation. Well, you can't provide any representation as a transaction broker. So what would be the right answer? And hopefully you decided B, because designated agency, although it's still considered dual agency, the difference between dual and designated is that designated does offer exclusive representation for both parties. Because under designated, now even though the agent or the broker in charge is still the dual agent here, the agent has designated another licensee to work with the buyer. Or so you got one licensee with the buyer and one working for the seller. So they each have their own subagent working on their behalf. So now they are receiving exclusive representation. So the answer here would be B. Y'all, and if you didn't know this, you need to remember, designated agency, it is still dual agency. The difference is designated does offer exclusive representation for each party because they each have their own subagent working on their behalf. Okay? All right, hopefully that makes sense. Next question. Disclosed dual agency would most likely occur in, A says, a company that does not provide customer level services. Okay. B, a company that only practices buyer agency. Well, we know B can't be right, because if you only allow and practice buyer agency, then you cannot, dual agency would not even be on the table. C, cooperative sale situation. Cooperative sale means you're working with a licensee from a different company, right? That's what cooperating agents are. They work with a different company. Well, if you got a different company, then again, that takes dual agency off the table, so C would not be right. And D, it would not occur because it's prohibited by South Carolina law. Well, is dual agency legal in South Carolina? Absolutely. Yes, it is. So obviously D is not right because it is not prohibited under law. So really that only leaves A, a company that does not provide customer level services. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of people kind of get confused and hung up over this one. But here's what you got to be considered. First of all, we eliminated B, C, and D. There's no way they could have been right. So that just leaves us with A. And so now why is A right? What does that got to do with dual agency? Well, if you got a company, y'all, first of all, every company, every office must have a written office policy manual, right? So every office or company, y'all, has their own policies on what they can and cannot do, how they'll do things, and so forth. Well, if that company happens to have a policy that we do not provide customer level services, in other words, we will not operate or work with a customer, then that means either the party must agree to become a client or we're not going to work with you. So when you have a company that says everybody must be a client because we will not work with customers, obviously that greatly enhances the likelihood of dual agency because everybody has to be a client. You can't work with them if they're a customer. And that's what A says, a company that does not provide customer level services. Hopefully that one makes sense. Again, you'll probably see stuff like that on the exam for sure. All right, next question. Consent to disclose dual agency, A, can be withheld by either party before a specific transaction. Sounds good. B, results in limited representation to one principal but not the other. That's not true because we know, part of the disclosure requirement for dual agency is you got to let both parties know that you are now limited on what you can do for either party. Now, both sides are still going to get the exact same amount of representation, but because I'm trying to represent both buyer and seller, I'm going to be limited on what I can do for either party, right? Hopefully, and I'm not going to get into the details right now, but you need to know this if you don't. Under dual agency, you remember you got 6 fiduciary duties you owe your client. 3 of those duties become limited when you agree to dual agency. And that's part of what you have to disclose. So B can't be right because it just says it limits representation to one. No, it limits it to both. C is not says it's not permitted in South Carolina. Well, we just talked about that in the previous question. We know it is legal. Dual agency is legal in South Carolina. And then D is a blanket authorization for all transactions. No, we know that because before you can enter into dual agency, it has to be disclosed and all parties have to agree to it in writing. So you can't just say it's a blanket authorization for every transaction. No, that's not right. So the best answer to me looks like would be A, because it can be withheld. Either party can refuse, say, no, I'm not comfortable with dual agency and I'm just not going to agree to that. And if either party says no, then what are the options here? Just a little detail here. One, obviously the buyer will now have an option. Designated agency could be an option, right? If they wanted to designate another licensee to work with that buyer. But if that's not going to be suitable for the buyer either, then the only other option you have is to go find another agent in a different company, which would be a cooperating sale, and then they could represent you. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. The next question says, commissions earned by an agent in a real estate transaction, A, may be shared with an unlicensed person if that person aided in bringing the buyer and seller together. Well, we know that's wrong, right? That's a no-no. You cannot, an unlicensed person cannot receive compensation from a real estate transaction. That's South Carolina law. B, are determined by agreement of the agent and his or her principal. I like that one. C, must be paid by the seller in each transaction. When it comes to compensation, there is no requirement on who has to pay or how much they have to pay. It's always negotiated. Okay, that's the only way you can do commissions. It is strictly negotiable. Every part of it is negotiable. And then D, they're based on rates set by LLR. Well, that's contrary to what I just said, and obviously that one would be wrong as well. LLR does not set rates, nor should anybody else set rates. That would violate antitrust laws. It's called price fixing. Again, commissions are always negotiable between the principal and the agent. When I say negotiable, that means they can negotiate who's going to pay. They can negotiate how much who's going to pay. All that is, it's all negotiable. So the right answer is B. It's determined by agreement of the agent and his or her principal. And obviously, when they say agreement, you have to have negotiated some agreement on how that's going to work. All right. And then I think this is the last question for this video, but what types of brokerage relationships are recognized in South Carolina? Well, let's see. A, buyer, seller, undisclosed, and dual. Well, undisclosed, that should be a clue right there. That A can't be right because we don't do anything undisclosed. B, subagency, disclosed, dual, and seller. First of all, what is disclosed or undisclosed? It doesn't say what kind of agency that is. But B is not right because of subagent. Subagency is not practiced nor legal in South Carolina today. It used to be, but it's not today. So subagency kicks that one out. C says the seller, buyer, disclosed dual, and transaction broker. Well, those are authorized and legal in South Carolina. But what does D say? Seller, buyer, full. Again, full doesn't tell us anything. And fiduciary. That's not a type of agency relationship. So, the right answer in this case would have to be C, because we know seller, buyer, as long as dual agency is disclosed, is good, and transaction brokerage is legal in South Carolina. So, that was kind of quick, but hopefully you found it to be a little bit helpful. And, we like to try to keep these videos short because I know long videos can get a little tedious and boring. But we'll have some more, and hopefully you'll check out some more videos coming up. And again, hopefully this was helpful to you. Shine for Jesus.